In this video, we're going to look at setting up your MIDI devices in Studio One 5. Now, all MIDI hardware devices, whether they're keyboard controllers or instruments or control surfaces, are referred to as external devices in Studio One language. Now, we get to the setup window in the preferences, which we can get to here, or we can just use the shortcut Command, comma to bring it up. There are several tabs, and I'm going to go to external devices. So the idea is to hit add and select from the list of devices or create one if it's not already there. Now, this is my keyboard controller that I'm using, and I'm going to delete it just so I can show you how to add it from scratch. So I'm going to start by hitting the add button. And first thing is to scan through the list and choose from this predefined list if it's there. Now, mine's not. I have an Ovation Impulse and I deleted it, so it's missing. So I'm going to go new keyboard, and that's for a new MIDI keyboard controller. And the first thing is to identify it. So I'm going to type in the name of the manufacturer, and then I'm going to give it a name. And we'll be able to see the unique name in the list once I finish creating this. Now we need to select which MIDI channels we're going to be transmitting from this keyboard. I'm probably only going to be using MIDI channel 1, but I'm going to leave them all enabled. And if you're not sure, just leave them all enabled. And this is an important parameter here. Where are we going to receive it from? So this device that I'm creating is going to receive signal from my Impulse. Now, if you're not seeing your connected device in this drop-down menu, you need to check and make sure it's appearing in the Audio MIDI Setup utility. Now, to get there, on your hard drive, in your Applications folder is a subfolder called Utilities, and in there is an app called Audio MIDI Setup. And when you launch it, you might not see your MIDI devices at first. Right now, I'm seeing my connected audio hardware, which of course needs to be recognized here as well. But under Window, we can go Show MIDI Studio, and there it's showing all my connected devices, and there's my Impulse. So if yours isn't appearing in here, then it's likely you'll need to install some kind of driver from the manufacturer in order for it to be recognized by your Mac. So back to Studio One. We can then selectively enable any of these types of MIDI messages to be filtered on input. Now, there's normally no reason to filter any of these. However, in my case, I have an old keyboard and it's a bit quirky and it sometimes sends random pitch bend information. I need to get that fixed, but for now it's still a problem. So I'm going to filter out pitch bend messages. And here, where am I going to send the signal to? I'm going to leave it at none because I'm just using it as an input device. And we can enable the split channels function if you want to create a separate instrument track input for each MIDI channel from your keyboard. I'm going to leave that off since I'm just using it as a simple one MIDI channel input device. We can optionally enable split channels. That's if you want to create a separate instrument track input for each MIDI channel on your keyboard, which I don't need or want to do. I'm just using it to transmit on one channel. And we can optionally enable this as a default instrument input so that when you create new instrument tracks, it'll automatically be assigned. Now, those of you with a keen eye will notice this new Enable MPE feature. And this is for new modern keyboard controllers that use MPE, MIDI polyphonic expression, or the old MIDI polypressure. And we can find that in controllers from CME and some of the ones from Raleigh, the Seaboard and the Sound Blocks, and even the PreSonus Atom. They use this new MIDI polyphonic expression format. So I'm going to hit OK, and we're done. And there's my keyboard. And if I go to Add, we look in the list, there's an Ovation, and in there's the one that I created. And we can always edit by selecting these and hitting the edit button and edit the properties. And then, of course, we can remove it. Now, we have different types of MIDI devices we can connect. I'm going to hit the Add button, and we can go to New Instrument. And this is intended for external MIDI hardware synths, workstations, and other devices that generate sound. And we set them up similarly. We choose from the list or create a new one. But here it's important to set up both the send and receive channel because it's sending MIDI information into Studio One, but it's also receiving. So we need to select which port on our MIDI interface, etc., and the channels. And we can also optionally have it send or use MIDI clock and time code. Now here we set up new control surfaces. And again, we need both a send and receive channel since they both respond to signals from Studio One and also send information into Studio One. So we set up the MIDI device port for each of them over here. And finally, some of you may want to use your actual computer QWERTY keyboard for MIDI input if you don't have a hardware controller or if you're just working on a laptop. And we can easily set that up here under PreSonus. We can choose QWERTY keyboard. And that way you can use your actual computer keyboard to type in, and you can use that as the default instrument as well if you want. So I'm going to hit cancel for now, and we just have the one controller we need. So that's it for the MIDI setup. But while we're here, I just want to take a brief look at some of the preferences in locations. Now, user data, you'll recall when I started this new song, it defaulted to this specific location, and that's the default location, but you can set it here. This will bring up a file dialog box so that every time you create a new song, it'll default to the new location. I personally prefer to set the location for my song manually in the start window each time I create a new song because I'm always saving to different places, but this is where you can set a default location. And we can also enable autosave with this specified interval of time. And you can also manage where the factory content is installed. Again, this is the default location, but you can add or remove by selecting here and hitting add or remove and have it installed to these different locations. Same thing with the instrument library. We'll continue with more in the next video.